2014, 1939 in a quiet room at Swiss Carl Jung, who is considered among the greatest psychologists of the West, has written the lines, "The word challenges a new understanding of transmission, system of human consciousness after decades, patient treatment and discovery. The depth of psychology Jung faces, with an ancient truth from the Fung, Eastern Buddhist doctrine of selflessness, thought that the ego he tried to spend all life research may actually be just an illusion. This is more than just a shot." Now shocking for a scientist, the West, but also a turning point, must reflect on the reasons themselves. His theory is contrary to expectations about the rejection of Jung, does not shy away from ideas. Instead, he called Buddhism the most reasonable and direct teaching. So, what makes Jung a psychologist who has built a theory based on the ego and the psychological integrity is again attracted to a seemingly diametrically opposed ideologies? With himself Carl Jung famous for the theory of the collective unconscious and the causes of, he spent most of his life discover the deepest structures of the human mind. He believes that the ego, or the self, is the center of consciousness and psychological integrity. In the Italian aspects, the conscious and the unconscious are merged. But during years of hard research, he found that many discoveries has a strange resemblance to the Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism. This dogma becomes a crossroads in the career of using the ancient version of Buddhism is translated into English and German in the era of. He introduced Jung to a way of looking, new consciousness and suffering, in which the Buddhist selflessness poses a challenge, big for familiar concepts belonging to Western psychology. Does the me we cling to really exist, or just an illusion created? Because the interaction of the five aggregates is the body, feeling of happiness and happiness, while Jung considers the ego as the center of integrity and being a bridge to achieve deeper self-awareness. Buddhism affirms that it is not at all has any ego. According to the Buddha's every feeling, the sense of self is just a set of. The phenomenon of impermanence is constantly changing, and there is no fixed nature here, just a philosophical idea, but also a truth tested through meditation and direct observation. As a scientist who does not can ignore the similarities between his psychological theories and this teaching, he realized that suffering, pain experienced by our patients, from anxiety and depression to feelings of loss, directions, are all rooted in one thing: common attachment and a fixed self, irreplaceable. Exchange. The meeting between Western psychology and Buddhist philosophy, not only a cross-cultural but is also a collision between the two ways looking at human nature. Spend a lifetime exploring the depths of psychology, with the goal of integrating contradictions in mind into a unity. Then the Buddha taught how to overcome everything, clinging and seeing clearly the nature of selflessness of all phenomena. But the terrible thing, surprised that instead of denying each other, the two, this view seems to supplement in an unexpected way, that it is the face of adversity. This theory has opened up a new depth in the journey to learn about human consciousness. What happens when the theory of the ego of Jung and the Buddhist doctrine of selflessness meet? Are they really opposites, or they are providing tricks, variations of the same larger picture, and more importantly, a combination of the two? This perspective can help us understand, become more aware of yourself and attain enlightenment, real enlightenment or not. Music. Carl Jung was born in 1875 in Sailor, among the pioneering psychologists of the 20th century. The career journey of he started from a medical background, but quickly shifting to the field psychology under the influence of Sigmund Freud, who is considered the father of feces psychology. Jung and Freud once had a relationship, close cooperation but different, in a theoretical approach that has made the two angry and separated. While Freud focused on unconscious elements related to sex impulses, the basic human leap is open again. The concept of the unconscious considers it to be a collective and multidisciplinary phenomenon beyond personal experiences. Here is the premise for him to develop the collective unconsciousism and archetypes. Those are two of the major contributions. His best for psychology, learning to define the collective unconscious as a deeper layer of healing psychology, common memories and patterns that everyone shares regardless of culture or the era. Of these archetypes he calls is a prototype that appears in a dream, myths and folktales, reflects the basic patterns of the paving human experiments, some floating prototypes. The language that Jung mentioned included the mother, the hero, the imposter and the shadow. In his theory, the prototype is not only a cultural symbol but also the elements that make up how we receive, wake up and experience the world of interesting things. That these archetypes have similarities astonishing with the concepts in Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism, in factors such as karma and predestined. And the five aggregates also describe how you, who is dominated by Italian stereotypes. However, before Jung is exposed, extensive with Eastern philosophy, he has greatly influenced by Arthur Schopenhauer, a German philosopher, 19th century, who introduced many ideas. Buddhism in the West. Schopenhauer is the first person in Western philosophy. West emphasizes the role of suffering as an indispensable part of the experience, human experience, from a very close perspective. With the Buddha's unique cultivation, Schopenhauer's products from a young age, and was attracted by the way this philosopher, describing life as a series of endless sufferings, can only be overcome through the renounced desire. This sows the seeds for Jung's interest in philosophies. The East leads to close relationships. His relationship with Richard Wilhelm, A, famous scholars and translators of the scriptures. Chinese Wilhelm introduced understanding of philosophical texts such as the Tao Te Ching, and the translation of the scriptures have since expanded his perception of the way of thinking of Oriental's theory of the I am part of a larger structure, which he called the overall psychology of Mr. Meow, describing the self as the center of consciousness where we are aware of ourselves and each other. However, underneath the I am the individual unconscious, where it is contained forgotten memories and emotions, repressed, and even deeper, the collective unconscious, a common sense that connects all humanity. In this system is considered to be the achievement of psychological integrity, is still called self-realization as the goal, the ultimate human process, which he calls the process of personalization. Ask people to face and integrate forgotten or rejected parts of myself, including the original shadow. The model is the opposite of the ego, is similar to how Buddhism encourage practitioners to face suffering and your own fantasies to achieve to be enlightened. And one of the similarities, the similarity between the theories of Jung and Buddha, is how both ideologies receive the essence of consciousness. Jung realizes that many of his patients, through dreams and analyzed statuses, nature creates symbols that resemble with images from Buddhist philosophy, such as a one-form mandala. Sacred statue represents wholeness, integrity, and harmony. In many cases, Jung noted that the patients of body, even though they don't know Buddhism, they can still universal symbols. This proves the existence of the collective unconscious form. This makes him the more confident that human consciousness, not only a personal phenomenon but is also part of a vast network, more similar to the way Buddhism describes destiny begins through the career journey of Jung. Doesn't just explore depth of psychology but also expands the boundaries by harmonizing the powers of knowledge, the West and the East of his mind. For Eastern philosophy, especially, Buddhism doesn't just enrich his theory but also laid the foundation for an intellectual intersection between the two. This culture not only helps him better understand human nature, but also gives us a multifaceted view more about yourself, opening the door to explore more deeply about consciousness and children, the path to integrity. So what will occurs when these discoveries meet Buddha's philosophy of selflessness? Around the 5th century BC, former Prince Siddhartha Gautama renounced the palace after witnessing the age of fake illness, disability, and death. Determined to find the truth, liberation after many years of asceticism did not succeed. He chose the middle way. Under the corner of Bodhidharma gained last place, enlightenment, to become a pure Buddha. The Buddha's enlightenment is not only the highest state of awareness, that there is also a deep philosophical discovery. That is the truth. The selfless self, anatta, is one of the 3 hallmarks of each statue with supreme anatta and suffering. According to this doctrine, what we call that I am actually just a temporary combination. The time of the 5 elements is called the aggregate, i.e. material life, i.e. sensation. Thought is perception and action is the mind. Action and reality, that is, the consciousness of the elements. This is constantly changing without factors, which exists independently or immutably and is caused by. There is no real ego that matters. Determination or longevity of the Buddha's strong patience. That there is a false perception of an ego. Sustainability is the source of every measure. Pain because it leads to clinging and fear. The doctrine of selflessness is not just a discipline, philosophical point but also a method, practice to help people get rid of the constraints of illusions. This concept of selflessness is also well understood, more through the principle. Kutta is one of the discoveries of the most important of the Buddha's predestined liberation. Likes that every phenomenon arises due to dependence on other conditions. Nothing exists independently or in itself is all the result of a complex correlation networks. For example, the flower cannot exist without it. Sunlight, water, land and people. Observation to recognize that it is similar to what we call the ego is also only one. The set of temporary medical elements is maintained because of the constant interaction between the body and the mind. When looking deeply at the essence of the self, we will see that it does not have a fixed entity that is just a line. The continuous flow of doctrinal phenomena. The Buddha's selflessness is not mistaken in denial. The existence of the individual that is intended to help the child who sees the true nature of exists. This is a breakthrough, only in philosophy but also in the way of practical approach to liberation from suffering from being aware that the ego, just an illusion. We can let go of clinging to judgment and resentment. Fear of this not only leads to self-esteem, by intrinsic but also creates a magnetic attitude, profound compassion for all sentient beings. By we understand that everyone endure the same kind of delusion and suffering, pain as they do. The influence of the doctrine of selflessness is limited to the field of religion that also spread to psychology and even modern science. In learning the concepts of ontology and identity is reset the issue when with the idea that nothing exists in a self-inflicted way. In psychology, fall is studied as a way to reduce stress and improve mental health. God through helping people let go, get rid of negative thoughts related to female. To practice meditation, a method in Buddhism has been proven is capable of changing the structure and the function of the brain. Helps people should be more aware of the impermanent nature and the selflessness of experiences compared to reason. See Jung's theory of the selfless ego. Seems to be a contradictory view, but in fact, the two have similarities. Is very profound if Jung considers the I am the center of consciousness in you. People who embark on a journey of discovery, the Buddha's selflessness, encourage the practitioner to overcome all intentions, mindfulness of the ego to attain the state of self. Because it is dark that both views are pressed. That clinging to an attempted ego is the source of suffering and limiting personal development. Seeing wholeness through harmony, internal contradictions, while the Buddha emphasizing the realization of impermanence and non-fixed of all phenomena of both, all lead to the same goal of free from the constraints of the mind. The doctrine of selflessness with philosophical depth, learning and its practice have crossed the line, the boundaries of time and space, to become into one of the revolutionary ideas, the most united in human history. Between profound philosophy and method, its practice not only brings about a new understanding of human nature that also provides a path to overcome suffering and achieving true freedom. This opens the door for us to compare and dialogue between the two ideologies, the great humanity of Western psychology and Buddhist philosophy. Carl Jung in his research journey, save his psychology he was attracted to, because of the way Buddhist philosophy interprets, like the nature of human consciousness with concepts such as infinite dependent arising and liberation from suffering. This break not only enriches the Jung's principles, but also challenges the theories that he has developed over many years. 5 of the clear intersections, sharp between Jung's thought and philosophy. Buddhism lies in the similarity between the concepts of the Buddha's selflessness and the theory of nothingness. The Buddhist consciousness teaches that the self, or the ego, is just an illusion that is only sustained by the temporary combination of the. Similarly, Jung also noticed that I often think that self-consciousness is only the surface of a sinking ice treasure with unconscious practice. Deeper in cures the patterns common of humanity of both ideologies. All emphasize that the misconception about the ego as a fixed entity is the main causes of suffering and psychological imbalance. Buddhist encouragement, encouraging practitioners to see through the nature of nothingness of each phenomenon to relieve from clinging while tolerating. Encourage their patients to face the unconscious parts of the self are special, is the shadow of the rejected parts or repressed to achieve mental integrity. In addition, the concept of the prototype of Jung and the concept of dharma in Buddhism also have many notable similarities. Prototypes according to content are stereotypes. Universality lies in the collective unconscious. Underneath symbol and dream, mythology and culture they are weak, foundational factors that shape how we receive, awakening and experiencing the world. In Buddhism, Dharma is not only the teachings but also the basic principles govern existence. In the universe both archetype and dharma all operate as frameworks that through which humans understand and interact with this reality. The more affirmed when Jung realized that the symbols such as mandalas represent integrity and harmony appear not only in Buddhist culture but also in dreams and experiences of patients. Western contact with Buddhist ideas not only helps Jung enrich theory but also changed the way he recognizes human nature in Italy. Awakening over the years 1920 Jung began to spend time researching rescue of Buddhist texts in English and German. He was fascinated by the way Buddhism doesn't just explain suffering, but also provides a real path forward to get past it. Letters and diaries of Jung from this period reveals a big change in his thinking. From seeing the ego as the center of consciousness, he began to realize that clinging to the falling table may be the biggest obstacle to with psychological development. Jung wrote that Buddhism seems to have reached the depth that Western psychology still I can't touch this yet. There is no that is. He abandoned the theories of instead. He tried to integrate they with Eastern philosophy, created a more holistic approach than a single. The obvious evidence for this change is the way dream analysis and symbols of previous patients he focused on the decoding of personal factors, but after exposure to Buddhist philosophy, he began to pay attention to bearing patterns. Globality. Symbols are not only reflecting on the individual but also connecting with deeper layers of consciousness. He noticed that many of our patients, even though they do not have knowledge of Buddhism, that still creates identical images and icons with the concepts in the Buddhist Sutra, spears such as mandalas or diamond bodies. This also strengthens Jung's belief that human consciousness is not only limited in individual factors but also linked with a network of timeless common sense, space and non-space. If Buddhism emphasizes let go and overcome the ego to reach enlightenment, the psychology of Jung provide tools to understand and harmonize with different parts in mind. First, when a state of integrity can be achieved. Jung once commented that Buddhism does not denying the ego as an existential entity for the time being, but only insisted that the perceive it as permanent and immutable as a mistake. This is an acknowledgement strongly that two ideologies instead of mutually exclusive and open up together. A broader view of the nature of the child. The intersection between Jung and Buddha education does not only stop at the level of theory but also has a deep practical meaning. It shows that the discovery of the body is not a lonely path or just belong to a specific ideology. Instead, it's a hybrid journey. The U2 from many traditions to not only to understand themselves better, but also overcoming psychological and mental barriers. This leads us to the question, important, how the two ideologies can coexist and complement each other to help people achieve the real escape. And this is the intersection. Reasonable. Carl Jung's ego magic and concept. The selflessness of Buddhism at first glance seems to be the opposite. Completely set aside the self as the center of consciousness is the key to achieving psychological integrity, while denying the existence of any fixed ego treated as just a fantasy thought that it leads to suffering. However, when going deep into the essence of both concepts, we discover an interesting paradox. Both are true and more, they complement each other perfectly in the resolution of their children's sufferings. Jung defines the ego as center of consciousness, where the concentration of the thoughts, feelings, memories, and feelings about himself. In Jung Kai's theory, I am not only a necessary part but is also an important tool for understanding and harmonizing different parts of psychology, especially the personal unconscious and the unconscious. The collective, according to the man, can only achieving integrity when the self receives awakening the rejected unconscious parts, or repressed as the shadow of the anima, animus, i.e. masculine or feminine image, internality, and integrating them into Italy. This process he called the individual. It is a long journey, but it is necessary for each individual to reach the state of, from the opposite realization of Buddhism. Do not see the ego as the center, but consider it is a temporary set of the five aggregates. Mindfulness and selfless consciousness affirm that no fixed entity has. It can be called me selling the self that we often clinging is actually just a fantasy. Thought is maintained by ignorance and clinging. The Buddha taught that misperception is wrong. Ego is the main cause of suffering because it makes people bound, tied to desires, fear, and despair. Instead of trying to reinforce the ego, Buddhism encourages practitioners to let go. All conceptions of the self are attained from there, a state of enlightenment where there is no more clinging or suffering. Pain. The difference between these two views lies in the goal and approach. When Jung emphasized the development and integrating the ego to achieve fullness, Buddhist psychology focuses on overcoming the ego to reach dark freedom. This creates a paradox. The side that builds the other self destroys it. However, if we look deeper, we'll find that both approaches are in order to solve the same problem, which is suffering due to attachment to the Jung ego. Does not deny that the ego can become into a source of suffering when it is too hard or distorted by the parts that are not yet. Or Buddhism is also not completely foot in the existence of the ego that only emphasizes that it has no fixed nature, and the wrong perception of it is the problem. Both Jung and Buddhism agree that understanding the nature of the ego is the key to liberation from suffering. In the theory of the fish process, humanization does not make the ego should be stronger, but it is to help what the self receives and merge with other parts of the mind. From there reaches a state integrity far beyond the usual semi-self. Similarly, Buddhism uses meditation and contemplation to help the practitioner realize that the ego is just an illusion that is maintained by the aggregates, and thereby let go of all attachment, clinging to it. Jung admits that the view of Buddhism can shed light on the limits of Western psychology. He wrote that Buddhism doesn't just help you, the one who overcomes the illusion of the self, that also opens up the depths that psychology still unable to continue. The near paradox between self and selflessness. It becomes even clearer when we realize that they are both geared towards addressing different aspects of the same problem that Jung focuses on. Help your patients build one. I'm strong enough to face the parts unconsciously rejected or suppressed. This is especially necessary for these who is struggling with chaos. Introspection when the ego is weak or disintegrating can lead to psychological disorders. Serious reverse Buddhist emphasis that even if the ego has been building, it is still an illusion that needs to be overcome to attain enlightenment. Must be two mutually exclusive goals, but two stages in a journey. Before a person can let go, they need to understand and be in harmony with it. Both points of view complement each other profoundly. While Buddhism provides a comprehensive view of the impermanence and selflessness of all manifestations, statues, Jung psychology brings tools to understand and address specific aspects of the human mind to help people face the sin of the mind. And Buddhism led way to overcome all the limits of falling to attain ultimate freedom when combine them to create a full path, while helping people harmonize with the body has just overcome the illusions of. This supplement itself is not only bringing theoretical significance but also have profound practical value in life. We live every day on a regular basis, facing inner conflicts, feelings of anxiety and clinging. Ideas about the psychology of self help us recognize and face hidden parts of the mind, while Buddhism teaches how to let go thoughts of self-devotion to living more freely than a combination of the two ways. This approach offers a strong path to overcome suffering, to help us not only understand yourself well, but also live in a harmonious and meaningful way. Then a combination of general psychology and Buddhist philosophy not only brings philosophical discoveries that also offer practical tools to address problems in everyday life. Both ideology is aimed at helping children, people who face and overcome at the same time attaining peace and freedom in the soul. Below are how practices from two systems. This system can be applied to the real to bring about meaningful changes. Tell one of the famous methods in psychology uses imagination. Active imagination. This is a techniques to help humans communicate with unconscious parts of the mind through guided imagination. In real, participants focus on a dream image or feeling, then to the ideas and images related to the natural awakening process to help them access prototypes or shadow rejected or pinched parts. Compress in the unconscious and integrate them into awareness. Of this is especially effective in the resolution of internal conflicts or search for deeper meaning in life. Similar to Buddhist meditation, provides a method for observing and understand the nature of the mind thoroughly. The popular term is Zenquan Vipassana, where the practitioner gathers, pay attention to the breath, body sensation or thoughts and emotions that appear in the mind through observation. That non-judgmental practitioner can recognize the impermanence and impermanence of all phenomena. This technique not only helps reduce stress and anxiety but also help your child who let go of the ideas of the since then he has lived freely and gently. More than the intersection of imagination, positive tolerance and Buddhist meditation, religion lies in the focus on consciousness and facing the profound aspects of the mind, while the imagination actively encouraged positive participation to the images and icons. Meditation emphasizes observation and letting go. When combining these two methods to come up with a unique balance that helps your child, the discoverer of the impressions in the mind, just creates a distance so that it does not get caught up in emotions or thoughts. Negative. For example, a person regularly feeling anxious about the future may use active imagination to shape. Using the source of this worry, they can meet the symbols in your mind, represent fear, insecurity, or signs. Memories in the past have created feelings. This is then done using meditation, that they can observe the emotions and thinking this without judging. Gradually realize that they are not their real qualities but only the most current statue of this combination is not only help them better understand themselves but also reduce mental pressure. The next theory is a prototype of a concept important in general psychology, as also can be applied in the life of the goods day through the identification of H patterns, repetitive behavior or tables, statues appearing in art, dreams, or relationships. For example, a person often dreaming of being lost in forest can recognize that this is the statue of disorientation or fear. In real life, by identify this prototype, they can examine, destroy the root cause and find a way to face it. In Buddhism, infinite practice, the self brings great benefits in the relationships and daily work. By realize that everyone is dominated by the same illusions and delusions, we can reduce judgment, consider and develop compassion. Example, in conflict situations, instead of reactions from the ego and trying to prove yourself, yes, we can adopt the attitude, letting go of Buddhism, to realize that this conflict does not necessarily have to be in relation to their true nature. They see sometimes it's just a temporary emotion. It's not that you really want this. Now helps solve difficult situations, tells peacefully and efficiently than many modern therapists have concluded. Combining Jung's methods with meditation, Buddhist meditation to help patients reduce stress, handling injuries and outbreaks. Developing self-awareness of a maintainer can instruct patients to use their minds' positive imagination to visualize traumatic situations in the past. Afterwards, use meditation to help them let go negative emotions related to signing. The result is that the patient is not only better understand the GC source of the problem, that also felt liberated from these mental burden. These practical applications show that the psychology of learning and meditating on the Buddha religion is not just a concept, statues, but also powerful tools to transforming lives. By combining deep understanding of the mind of compassion with the selfless wisdom of our Buddhism, we can learn to deal with the daily challenges wisely and more compassionate. The most important thing is that both methods encourage them we explore ourselves and search for answers. From yourself by journey to freedom and integrity begins with understand the mind and let go of the constraints. Its content in Buddhist philosophy, even though they come from two cultures and backgrounds different, have met each other at a point. The most important thing is the search for true about human nature and the path leading to psychological freedom. Through analytical psychology has explored how the ego and the parts of the unconscious interact, creating inner conflicts, while that Buddhism with its teachings on selflessness has indicates that it is the clinging to a I don't have reality is the deep cause. Far from suffering, both paths, although different, each approach leads to a common destination that liberates people from the constraints of the mind and open up a real free state. The intersection between the right psychology and Buddhism doesn't just shed light on these questions of consciousness that also provide these practical tools to face suffering, pain in daily life, encouraging people to face the shadow, the parts that are repressed in the unconscious, and integrate them into consciousness to achieve Buddhist integrity. On the other hand, teaches that suffering will end when we realize that the ego is just an illusion and let go of all attachment to the two ways. This is not contradictory but complements each other, helps us understand and reconcile, align with the other self to show how overcoming the very boundaries that the body created. The second, from a deep angle, more than Jung and Buddhism both emphasized that psychological freedom does not come from change the outside world, but from the transformation of internalization, is called self-manifestation. Actualize the process of personalization and reconciliation, in tune with the unconscious parts of the mind. Buddhism calls it the enlightenment of receiving, clear awareness of impermanence and impermanence in nature. Fall of all phenomena both agree that suffering is not a condition, which is the result of receiving mistakes, and when we change how to see yourself and the world, suffering will disappear. But what does for both of these ideologies to be strong? It is not only about ideas, thought, that in the ability to apply practically, from the use of active imagination of Jung to discover the unconscious, to practicing Buddhist meditation, to realizing the selfless nature that everyone has, can find suitable methods to deal with stressful anxiety and conflicts in everyday life. This tool doesn't just help people better understanding of oneself, but also leading to a freer life in us, no longer being forced by sentences. The story that I myself created about Jung once wrote that the final goal also of Western psychology, just like that of Western religious practice, Jung Chuan, in the heart from the table to the fall, a state of integrity greater than Buddha. The same truth is expressed by strange preaching than seeing the world as one. Bubbles like a dream, and you will overcoming the suffering of these two ideologies as two sides of the same coin, a common goal of human liberation from psychological constraints to live a freedom, compassion and meaning. So, the end of this journey is not choosing between Jung or Buddhism, which is the way. The table uses wisdom from both to changing one's own life, because it does not lie in trying to become someone else, that lies in letting go illusions about self to realize that you have always been full and complete from who you are in your own nature. When there is no more story about yourself, let this question be a torch, gradually glimmer for your journey of discovery, opening up a world of freedom and peace. Always ready to welcome your gratitude. See you again in next video. Wishing you and your family so much health.